It happened before the menu opened, before the wine breathed, before anyone noticed who mattered. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Privilege rarely does. The old man stood near the glass wall, hands folded, back straight, waiting without impatience, waiting without demand. The hostess glanced at him twice, not suspicious, uncertain, the kind of uncertainty money creates. Janet noticed him immediately, not because he was loud, because he didn't belong to her idea of the room. Five-star places trained people like her. They were mirrors. They reflected status. Anything that didn't reflect back correctly felt offensive. She checked her watch. Late afternoon. Golden hour. The time powerful people like to arrive. She had chosen the hour carefully. Alexander liked quiet. That was what she told herself. She adjusted her coat. Designer, uncreased, expensive without logos. She leaned toward the hostess. Low voice, controlled. He's been standing there for a while. No insult, just implication. The hostess hesitated. The old man heard anyway. He always did. Years of standing in rooms that passed through him had sharpened his hearing. He stepped back. One pace, then another, closer to the wall, as if walls were safer. Janet exhaled, satisfied, not proud, just relieved. This meeting mattered. She had waited months for it. Introductions through mutual friends, careful messages, a slow orbit around Alexander's world. She admired him. That was the word she used. Admiration sounded clean. Safer than desire, safer than fear. She had never dated a man who owned silence the way he did. Men she knew filled space. Alexander didn't. He controlled it. That scared her. Which was why she needed today to be perfect. The old man reached for a chair near the window. Slow, respectful, not asking permission, assuming humanity. Janet noticed. Her eyes flicked up. A pause. Then, "You can't sit there." Not loud, not cruel, just final. The old man froze, mid-motion. The room didn't react. People rarely do. Injustice loves witnesses who believe it's not their turn. "I'm just waiting," he said. No defense, no challenge. Janet didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had already decided what he was. The hostess stepped in. Apologized to Janet, not to him. The old man nodded. Apologized himself. Not because he had done wrong, because apologies shortened moments. He moved again, closer to the kitchen doors, where heat escaped, where staff passed without stopping. Janet returned to her phone. Alexander hadn't arrived yet. She reread the last message he sent. "I'll be there shortly." Shortly was his word. Always vague, always true. She ordered water, corrected the waiter on the temperature, corrected him again on the glass. He nodded, smiled, left. The old man passed behind her on his way to the restroom. His steps were careful, measured. Years of avoiding attention had trained his body. Janet sighed. Not consciously. It escaped. Sharp, public. A sound meant to be heard. Is he lost? The words floated, light, cruel in their weightlessness. Someone laughed, not loudly, just enough. The old man stopped, didn't turn, didn't respond. He waited until the sound faded, then continued. Alexander watched from upstairs. He had been there for 20 minutes, not hiding, observing. The office lights were dim, the glass one way. He saw the room exactly as it was. He saw his father the moment he entered, the way he stood, the way he refused the offered chair earlier, the way he chose edges. Alexander didn't interrupt. He never did. Truth revealed itself when you let it breathe. He watched Janet, her posture, her impatience disguised as confidence, her ease, the ease people learned early, the ease that forgot others had weight. His hand rested on the desk. A thin folder lay open. Not about her, about staff schedules, maintenance logs, cameras, the systems that never lied. The restaurant had rules. They weren't written for customers. They were written for power. No one humiliated inside these walls. No one erased, not intentionally. Alexander stood, buttoned his jacket. The room below shifted before he appeared. Staff sensed it. The air changed. It always did. He walked slowly, not dramatic, deliberate. When he reached his father, he stopped, placed a hand on his shoulder. Firm, familiar. The old man looked up. Relief crossed his face. Nothing else. No complaint, no explanation. Alexander turned. Janet stood instantly. Her smile arrived early. Too early. She introduced herself, mentioned her father, mentioned philanthropy, mentioned growth. She spoke quickly, as if speed could outrun what had already happened. Alexander didn't answer. He gestured to the chair, the one she had denied. His father sat, at the center of the room. Alexander faced her. "This is my father." The sentence landed. No emphasis, no accusation, just fact. "This restaurant is his home." The silence that followed was not awkward. It was instructional. Janet's smile broke, just slightly. She tried to speak. Alexander raised his hand. Not to stop her, to stop himself. He nodded once. The wall behind them came alive. Screens, footage. No sound, only movement. Her movements, her gestures, her dismissals. Time slowed. The room didn't gasp, it absorbed. Alexander watched her watch herself. This was not punishment. This was exposure. He turned back to her. "You came here hoping I wouldn't see you." A pause. "You forgot I see everything." Janet didn't cry, didn't argue, didn't collapse. She did something worse. She went quiet. Her appointment ended without ceremony. No escort, no confrontation. Just the doors opening, then closing. Softly. Alexander sat with his father. Ordered tea. The old man smiled. Not in victory, in release. For the first time that afternoon, he was seen, and that was only the beginning. Janet did not leave the restaurant angry. That surprised her. She walked 2 blocks before she noticed her hands were shaking. Not fear, calculation breaking down. She had built her life on preparation. Nothing happened to her without warning. Except this. She replayed the moment again. The screens, the stillness, the way Alexander didn't raise his voice, didn't accuse, didn't need to. She told herself it was a misunderstanding, a lapse, 1 bad minute. But the silence followed her. Silence had a way of exposing lies. She had wanted Alexander long before she wanted the meeting. She had watched him from a distance, read about him, not gossip, patterns. Men like him followed rules. She learned them. He hated excess, valued discretion, rewarded loyalty. She mirrored that, or thought she did. What she didn't study was his father. Because people like her never studied men like that. The old man had appeared in none of the articles, none of the profiles, none of the philanthropic boards, which meant he didn't matter. That assumption had carried her far in life. Until now. She returned home to glass and quiet. Called her assistant. Cancelled dinner. Cancelled the next day's schedule. She needed time, not to feel, to repair. Meanwhile, across the city, Alexander sat with his father long after the dining room cleared. The staff moved softly, respectfully. No one asked questions. They never did. Alexander poured the tea himself. His father noticed. Said nothing. Alexander had learned patience from him, the kind built from being overlooked. "I didn't know you were coming today," Alexander finally said. His father smiled. "I wanted to see the place when it was full." A pause. "I like watching how people treat spaces they think don't belong to them." Alexander nodded. He had grown up watching his father work jobs no one remembered. Security, maintenance, night shifts, always present, never acknowledged. "I saw everything," Alexander said. His father's hand tightened slightly around the cup. "I know." Alexander looked at him. The old man met his gaze. Steady. "You always do." Alexander exhaled. This wasn't the first time. Just the first time it happened so publicly. Janet spent the night drafting messages she didn't send. Apologies, explanations, reframing. Each version sounded wrong. Too emotional, too strategic, too late. By morning, the story had already moved without her. Not on social media, not yet. Inside systems, inside offices. Inside calls that didn't include her. Alexander didn't blacklist her, didn't warn others. He did something quieter. He pulled records, background checks, employment histories, not on her. On everyone connected to her. Patterns mattered more than moments. And patterns began to emerge. She had never been accused, never reported. But there were departures, sudden exits. People who had left roles shortly after crossing paths with her, always with neutral references, always with silence afterward. Alexander didn't interpret, he verified. He noticed the same restaurant chain appearing twice, then 3 times, the same charity board, the same private school alumni group. She moved through power like water, leaving no mark, except fatigue. Alexander's father watched him work, didn't interrupt, finally spoke. She didn't mean to hurt anyone. Alexander looked up. I know. She just didn't see them. Alexander closed the folder. That's the problem. 2 days later, Janet received an invitation. Not from Alexander, from the restaurant's foundation. A formal request, a review meeting. She smiled when she read it. This was good. This meant repair. She chose her clothes carefully. Muted tones, no jewelry, nothing that spoke too loudly. When she arrived, the room was smaller than expected. No cameras, no press, just files, just people. Alexander wasn't there. Instead, a woman she didn't recognize led the meeting. No introductions, just documents, timelines, statements, incidents, not accusations, observations. Janet sat still. She had prepared for confrontation. Not this. You're not being punished, the woman said. You're being documented. The words landed heavier than any threat. Janet leaned forward. This is about the restaurant? The woman nodded. And the pattern? Janet's throat tightened. Am I banned? The woman closed the file. No. A pause. You're being removed. Janet frowned. From what? From access. Silence. The kind that doesn't explain itself. Alexander believes power should be quiet, the woman continued, so when it's taken away, it should be quiet too. Janet stood slowly. This is because of one moment. The woman met her eyes. No. It's because of all the moments no one stopped. Janet left without argument, without dignity, without understanding how final it was. Back at the restaurant, Alexander stood in the same place as before, the dining room full again, different faces, same dynamics. His father entered. This time the hostess smiled immediately, not trained, aware. Alexander watched. Justice hadn't announced itself. It rarely did. But something had shifted, and Janet would feel it. In calls not returned, in meetings rescheduled, in invitations that never came again. She wouldn't know why, not fully, and that was the consequence. Because real power doesn't humiliate, it removes. Janet noticed the change before anyone told her. It wasn't dramatic, no confrontations, no headlines, no sudden disgrace, just absence. Her assistant stopped receiving callbacks from certain offices. A charity gala she'd attended for 5 consecutive years sent a polite note. This year's guest list has been finalized. A private members' lounge delayed approving her renewal. Delayed. Then didn't respond again. At first, she assumed coincidence. Power teaches you that silence is temporary. She waited. Then she called in favors. That's when the discomfort started. People she had mentored suddenly sounded cautious. People who once laughed too easily around her now kept conversations short. No one accused her. No one explained. They simply stepped back, as if instructed not to be seen too close. Janet had spent her life learning how systems worked. This one was unfamiliar. Meanwhile, in a quiet office 3 floors above the restaurant's administrative wing, a file sat open on a desk. It wasn't labeled with Janet's name. It never was. It carried a simple internal tag, Courtesy Risk Log. Alexander had created it years ago, after his father was dismissed from a hospital waiting room, after a security guard laughed when his father asked for directions in a courthouse, after a board member once told him, "You don't look like the owner." Alexander didn't react then either. He documented. Every time someone mistreated his father, or anyone like him, because they assumed he was invisible, Alexander made a note. Names, places, dates, witnesses, no revenge, no emotion, just records. Most names never appeared again. Some rose higher. Those were the ones that stayed open. Janet's name wasn't new to the file. That was the part she would never know. She had crossed paths with Alexander's father twice before, once at a fundraiser, once at a private airport lounge. Each time, she had spoken around him, not cruelly, just dismissively. Enough to be noticed, not enough to be challenged. Alexander had closed the file both times. He believed in growth. Until the restaurant. That afternoon wasn't an incident. It was confirmation. Back home, Janet finally did what she rarely did. She asked directly. She called an old family advisor, someone who didn't fear her. "Something is happening," she said, "and no one is telling me why." There was a pause on the line, then a sigh. "You offended someone who doesn't fight publicly," the advisor said. Janet stiffened. "I don't offend people." Another pause. "You underestimate the ones who don't need to be seen." Janet pressed her lips together. "Who?" "I don't know," the advisor replied. "But I know this type. They don't punish loudly. They remove access and let the silence teach." Janet ended the call shaking. Silence had always been her weapon. Now it was being used on her. At the restaurant, Alexander's father returned again, this time invited. Staff greeted him by name. Not because Alexander asked them to, because word had spread. Quietly, respectfully. Alexander watched from a distance. His father sat near the window, eating slowly. Content. "You didn't tell them who I was," the old man said later. Alexander smiled faintly. "They figured it out." "Good," his father said. "That means they're learning to look." That night, Janet received one final message. Not from Alexander, not from the restaurant, from a mutual acquaintance. A short note. "Some doors don't slam, they simply stop opening." Janet stared at the screen. For the first time in her life, she felt something unfamiliar. Not guilt, not anger, irrelevance. And she realized, too late, that the man she admired wasn't impressed by wealth. He was measuring something else, something she had failed long before the restaurant. Because love, to Alexander, wasn't about who you adored. It was about who you respected when nothing was at stake. And Janet had already answered that question. Janet didn't ask for another appointment. She didn't demand. She didn't threaten. For the first time, she requested a single email. No subject line, no assistant copied, just one sentence. "I'd like to speak, privately, not as a daughter, not as a name." She stared at the screen after sending it. This was unfamiliar territory, waiting without leverage. The reply came hours later. Short, precise. "Tomorrow, 7:30 a.m., administrative floor. Conference room C. No signature, no reassurance. She arrived early. No entourage. No driver waiting outside. Just her and the quiet hum of a building waking up. Conference room C was smaller than she expected. Plain table, glass walls. A city view that didn't feel celebratory. Alexander entered alone. No handshake. No hostility. Just acknowledgement. He sat, opened a folder. Didn't look at her yet. "You wanted to speak," he said. Not a question. Janet inhaled. She had rehearsed this. Apologies. Context, regret. But none of it felt right in the room. "I didn't know," she began. Alexander finally looked up. "Knowing isn't the issue," he said. She swallowed. "I would never intentionally—" He raised a hand. Not aggressively, just enough to stop momentum. "I've reviewed the footage," he said calmly. "The statements. The timestamps." He slid a document across the table. It wasn't a legal threat. It wasn't a complaint. It was a timeline, minute by minute. Her gestures, her words, her pauses. No adjectives, just facts. Janet didn't touch it. "I'm not here to ruin you," Alexander continued. "If I wanted that, you wouldn't be sitting here." She nodded, unsure whether that was comfort or warning. "I invited you," he said, "because you came here believing admiration could replace character." Her eyes lifted. "That's not fair." "It is," he said evenly. "You admired the idea of me. But you evaluated my father." Silence filled the room. Janet felt heat rise, not anger, exposure. "I grew up being taught to read rooms," she said quietly, "to assess people quickly." Alexander leaned back. "So did I." He folded his hands. "I learned that power reveals itself in how people treat what they think cannot respond." Janet's voice lowered. "I can change." He nodded once. "I believe you." Her chest loosened. Then he added, "Just not here." She froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean this restaurant," he said, "and everything connected to it will never be a place you belong." He wasn't cruel. He wasn't cold. He was finished. "You humiliated someone who built me," he continued. "You didn't know who he was. That was the test." Janet's eyes burned. "You're punishing me for one moment." Alexander shook his head. "No, I'm protecting something that took a lifetime to build." He closed the folder. "This isn't revenge, it's alignment." He stood. "This meeting," he said, "wasn't for forgiveness." She stood too, desperate now. "Then what was it for?" He met her gaze. "So you wouldn't mistake silence for confusion." He left the room. Janet remained standing, alone. Glass walls, open city. No applause. Just the quiet understanding that wealth could open doors, but respect decided which ones stayed open. Downstairs, Alexander's father was leaving the restaurant. Staff held the door. Someone offered help. He declined politely. As he stepped onto the sidewalk, Alexander joined him. "You handled it well," the old man said. Alexander nodded. "She'll be fine." "And you?" his father asked. Alexander looked back at the building. At peace. They walked away. Not celebrated, not chased, just intact. Because consequences don't always arrive loudly. Sometimes they arrive as clarity, and clarity never asks permission. Janet didn't post an apology. She didn't release a statement. There was no carefully worded press note, no attempt to soften the narrative. For the first time, she let silence speak. The restaurant reopened the next evening. Same menu, same lighting, same reservations filled weeks ahead. Nothing changed on the surface, except one thing. The staff moved differently, straighter, quieter, more certain. They had seen something rare. Power used without cruelty. Authority exercised without spectacle. The old man returned a week later. Same entrance, same pace. This time, no one watched him closely. No one needed to. Respect had already been recalibrated. He sat where he liked. Not the corner, not the center. Just where the light reached the table. Alexander didn't join him. He didn't need to. The message had already settled into the walls. Janet, meanwhile, felt the consequences in places money couldn't insulate. Invitations stopped arriving, not all at once. Just selectively. Rooms still opened, but conversations shortened. Compliments cooled. People smiled. Then measured their words. She was no longer assumed safe. She noticed how often people asked questions instead of offering warmth. How often her name paused a room instead of filling it. There was no public disgrace, That was the cruelty. Nothing to fight, nothing to refute, only an invisible line she could now feel, but never cross. Weeks later, she passed the restaurant. She slowed, didn't go in. She stood across the street, watching strangers enter, watching waiters greet them with the same calm dignity, watching a system continue, unbothered by her absence. She understood then. The punishment wasn't exclusion, it was irrelevance. Inside, the old man finished his meal, left a modest tip, nodded once to the host. No one rushed him. No one hovered. He was exactly where he belonged. Outside, Janet turned away. No tears, no drama. Just a lesson that would stay longer than shame. That some doors don't close loudly. They simply stop recognizing you. And some power doesn't need to announce itself. It waits, it watches, and it remembers who you were when you thought it didn't matter. The city kept moving. The restaurant stayed full. And somewhere between wealth and worth, the balance quietly corrected itself. No headlines, no victory speech, just truth standing where it always had, unmoved. Months passed. The incident faded from headlines, but not from memory, not from the way people adjusted around Janet. She learned something slow, something sharp, that wealth opens rooms, but character decides how long people stay. She tried to recover it, the old rhythm, the easy access. She donated, attended quieter events, smiled more carefully. It didn't restore what was lost, because nothing had been taken from her. Something had been revealed. Alexander never reached out. Not once. No follow-up. No explanation. That absence spoke louder than confrontation. The restaurant continued its rise. Not because of the story, but because of consistency. Because guests felt safe there. Seen, unjudged. That reputation spread faster than any scandal. One evening, Janet finally went back. Alone. No entourage. No reserved table. She waited, like everyone else. The host recognized her. Didn't flinch. Didn't rush. Just nodded. And handed her a menu. She sat, ordered quietly, listened to the room, watched the staff move with confidence. Watched guests laugh without performance. She understood then. This place wasn't owned by money. It was owned by values. And values had already made their decision. When the bill arrived, she paid without looking. Left a generous tip, not as an apology, as acknowledgement. She stood, paused, looked once toward the back of the room. Alexander wasn't there. He didn't need to be. She left. Outside, the city reflected in glass and steel. She blended back into it. Not disgraced, not redeemed, just changed. Inside, the restaurant carried on. Plates cleared, tables reset. Another evening, intact. The old man never spoke of that night again. He didn't need to. His dignity had done the work. And somewhere in the quiet exchange between power and humility, the lesson settled. Not everyone who enters a room belongs there. And not everyone who owns it ever needs to say so. The end came without ceremony. Just balance, restored. And a silence that felt complete.